The Volvo wagon felt like a dented can among the polished chrome of Riverside. As we stepped out, the humid evening air carried the scent of gardenias and extreme wealth. Helen approached us with a smile that looked like a surgical incision. "Next time, dress them properly," she said, loud enough for guests to hear. My daughter's hands shook as she clutched her vintage lace. Maverick looked at Helen once, said 6 words, and silence followed. He whispered, "We are exactly where we belong." Helen's eyes narrowed into slits. We followed a server past the main terrace, where crystal glasses caught the orange sunset. The laughter of the elite sounded like breaking glass. Reed caught my eye from the VP lounge, but quickly looked away. He was busy adjusting his $3,000 silk tie. We were steered toward a dark corner near the kitchen service doors. The table was small and wobbly. A nearby trash bin smelled of discarded oysters and expensive lemon wrens. Maverick pulled out my chair with a deliberate, haunting grace. The guests were already beginning to point. Jude reached for a silver tray of appetizers as a waiter passed our exile. Helen appeared instantly, her hand blocking his small reach. "I am afraid those are for palates more refined than yours," she hummed. She patted Jude's head like he was a stray dog. "I will have the kitchen bring out some plain crackers." Elizabeth felt her face burn with a white, hot shame. Maverick did not flinch or argue. He simply watched the gold watch on Reed's wrist. The quartet began to play a sharp, discordant melody. 10 minutes later, Willa returned from the restroom with her head bowed low. Her soft top flats were scuffed, and her cheeks were streaked with salt. "Those girls said my shoes came from a donation bin," she whispered. Her voice was a fragile thread in the wind. Helen stood nearby, sipping champagne and nodding at the mothers of the bullies. She did not offer a single word of defense for her niece. Instead, she adjusted her diamond necklace and smiled. The children of Riverside were learning how to hunt from their parents. Helen glided over to our shadowed table with a group of investors. She gestured at my daughter's tearful face, as if she were a museum exhibit. "It is the culture shock of being so isolated in Vermont." Helen sighed. She looked at the guests with practiced pity. "The children simply do not understand the expectations of a proper social setting." I stood up, my chair legs screeching against the marble. My brother Reed finally walked over, his face flushed with a coward's guilt. He looked at us like we were a mistake. Maverick stood up slowly, and the air seemed to lose its warmth. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek, black smartphone. The screen glowed with a spreadsheet that held the power of a guillotine. He did not look at the guests or the shivering Helen. He looked directly at Reed and tapped a specific line of text. "I think it is time we discussed the lease," he said. His voice was calm and professional. Reed's face went the color of ash. The music stopped, and every guest turned to watch the fall. The silence was a physical weight in the humid air. Reed looked at the screen, and then back at Maverick. His hands began to tremble as he processed the numbers. Helen reached out to grab the phone, but Maverick stepped back. The guests leaned in, their faces masks of naked curiosity. "Is there a problem, Reed?" Maverick asked quietly. His voice was like a razor. Reed could not find his voice. The golden facade was finally cracking. "What lease?" Helen demanded, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. She looked around at her social circle with a desperate, fixed smile. Maverick ignored her and kept his gaze on my brother. "The residential file for Ironwood Holdings," Maverick explained. He scrolled through the digital contract with a steady thumb. "It seems your landlord has been very generous for 3 years." He paused for a beat. Reed's eyes darted to the floor. The luxury was an illusion. Helen's face shifted from confusion to a deep, ugly shade of red. She tried to laugh, but it sounded like a dry choke. "This is our house," she snapped at the crowd. She pointed a manicured finger at the white columns. Maverick tilted his head and offered a small, pitying smile. Actually, Helen, you are a tenant. He showed the screen to a nearby investor. The man gasped as he saw the signatures. The ownership was undeniable. The crowd began to whisper like dry leaves in a storm. Helen looked at the broken glass of her champagne flute. She realized the social hierarchy had just collapsed under her feet. Maverick turned the phone off and tucked it into his pocket. The subsidy ends tonight, he stated firmly. Reed looked like he might collapse onto the marble steps. He had been living on charity from the man he mocked. The betrayal was absolute. You cannot do this, Reed whispered, his voice cracking with fear. He looked at the mansion as if it were disappearing. Maverick stepped closer, his presence filling the grand foyer. I am simply choosing not to renew, he replied. His tone was as cold as a mountain winter. Helen began to back away toward the shadows of the hall. She was losing her grip on the world she built. The guests were starting to laugh. I took Willa's hand and felt her grip tighten in mine. We were no longer the outcasts in the dark corner. The people in designer suits were suddenly very quiet. Maverick looked at me and nodded toward the circular driveway. We have a long drive back to Vermont, he said. He didn't wait for an answer from my brother. We walked toward our old Volvo wagon. The headlights cut through the heavy, expensive darkness. As the engine turned over, I looked back at the terrace. Reed stood alone under the glowing chandeliers. Helen was nowhere to be seen, likely hiding from the shame. Maverick put the car in gear and drove away. We left the mansion and the fake smiles behind us. Jude asked if we could stop for burgers on the way. Maverick laughed and promised we would. A single moving truck sat parked at the gate. The car interior smelled of old leather and peace. I watched the mansion shrink into a tiny, glowing dot. Willa rested her head against the cool window glass. Her breathing was slow and steady for the first time. Jude was busy counting the streetlights as we passed them. Maverick kept his eyes fixed on the dark road ahead. He looked like the same man I married years ago. Yet everything about our future felt entirely different now. We reached the highway and the city noise faded. Maverick reached over and squeezed my hand very tight. I felt the calluses on his palms from the farm. He was not a nature writer in this moment. He was a man who had finally protected his pride. I am sorry I kept it from you, he said. His voice was low and rough like gravel. I realized then that he had carried this weight alone. The secret was a shield. Why did you wait so long? I asked softly. I watched the green highway signs flash past us. Maverick sighed and adjusted his grip on the wheel. I wanted to see if Reed would choose us, he replied. It was a simple truth that hurt my heart. My brother had failed a test he never knew existed. He chose the shiny things over his own blood. The realization made the car feel smaller and more intimate. Jude started to hum a song from the radio. The tension in the car began to melt away. We were heading toward the mountains and the quiet trees. I thought about the house we left in Riverside. It was a tomb built of marble and lies. Our farmhouse was drafty, but it was honest and warm. I closed my eyes and pictured our gravel driveway. We were going home to a life we actually owned. Maverick took the exit for a small roadside diner. The neon sign flickered with a tired, yellow light. We parked the Volvo next to a muddy farm truck. I helped Willa out of the car and smoothed her dress. She looked up at me and gave a small smile. The redness in her eyes had finally started to fade. We walked inside and sat at a vinyl booth. The waitress brought us water. The diner was empty except for an old trucker. Maverick ordered the biggest burgers on the menu for us. We ate in a comfortable silence that felt like victory. Jude told a joke about a cow and a tractor. Even Maverick laughed until his eyes began to crinkle. We were not billionaires or outcasts in this booth. We were just a family eating dinner at midnight. The world outside did not matter. As we walked back to the car, my phone buzzed. It was a frantic text message from my brother Reed. He was asking for a loan to cover the move. I looked at Maverick and showed him the screen. He did not say a word as he drove. He simply pointed at the horizon where the sun rose. I deleted the message and turned the phone off. We were officially starting over without them. The sunrise blood orange and purple across the Vermont border. We crossed the state line as the kids slept. Maverick navigated the winding mountain passes with a steady hand. The farmhouse appeared through the morning mist like a ghost. It looked small and gray against the vast green hills. I felt a sudden pang of fear about our life. Was this enough for them after the mansion? I watched a hawk circle the high timber. We parked on the gravel and the engine ticked cold. The silence of the woods was a heavy curtain. I carried Willa inside while Maverick took a groggy Jude. The house smelled of wood smoke and dried lavender from summer. We tucked them into their quilts and kissed their foreheads. Maverick stood in the hallway and looked at the floorboards. "I should have told you sooner," he whispered. He looked older in the pale dawn light. He walked to his small office and opened a safe. He pulled out a thick stack of legal papers. I saw the name Miller International printed in bold ink. This was not the nature writer I had known. It was a map of a kingdom built in secret. He handed me a single gold key with no label. "This is for the children," he said very softly. I felt the cold metal against my warm palm. "I do not want the money, Maverick," I said. I looked at the chipped paint on the window. He nodded and took a deep breath of air. "The money is just a tool for their freedom," he replied. I realized he had been protecting our simplicity all along. He wanted them to value the dirt and the trees. He wanted them to be whole people first. But the secret had created a wall between us. By noon, the local sheriff drove up the long driveway. He looked nervous and kept tapping his leather belt. He handed Maverick a thick envelope with a federal seal. "Someone in Connecticut is making a lot of noise," he said. My heart skipped a beat as Maverick opened the letter. Reed was not going away without a fight for the house. He was suing Maverick for a breach of verbal contract. Maverick read the pages and handed them to me slowly. Reed claimed Maverick promised him the house as an inheritance. It was a desperate lie from a man losing everything. I looked at the woods and felt the peace shatter. The lawyers would be coming to our quiet mountain home. Helen would not stop until she drew blood from us. Our sanctuary was no longer a secret to the world. Maverick walked to the porch and looked at the hills. He pulled his phone out and made one final call. "Release the audits on the Foster estate," he said. His voice was cold and lacked any brotherly mercy. I realized the war had moved beyond the mansion gates. Reed had no idea what he had just invited home. The quiet writer was gone and the Titan had arrived. The sheriff tipped his hat and drove away. The afternoon air turned brittle as Maverick stood on the porch. I watched him dial a second number while the kids played. He was not looking at the view anymore. His eyes were fixed on the black screen of his phone. "Block the transfer of all secondary assets," he commanded. He sounded like a man dismantling a bridge behind him. I felt the distance between us grow with every word. He was finally showing me the predator beneath the skin. Inside the kitchen, I checked the stove for some heat. The house felt colder despite the bright Vermont sun outside. I saw a black sedan creeping up our dirt road. It did not have the sheriff's markings on the door. Two men in dark suits stepped out onto our gravel. They carried briefcases that looked like weapons in this quiet place. Maverick hung up the phone and walked down the steps. He met them halfway with a look of pure ice. "We have a summons for Maverick Miller," the tall one said. He held out a blue folder with a silver seal. Maverick did not reach for the paper at all. He kept his hands in his pockets like a casual observer. "You are trespassing on private property." Maverick replied very softly. The men looked at each other with a flicker of doubt. They expected a writer, not a wall of stone. I could see their confidence starting to fade. The shorter man stepped forward and cleared his dry throat. "Your brother is claiming financial elder abuse," he stated loudly. I nearly dropped the iron skillet onto the floorboards. The lie was so large it felt physically heavy in the room. Reed was trying to paint Maverick as a thief of family funds. It was a play for the entire Ironwood Holdings fortune. They wanted to freeze our accounts before the sun went down. The legal war was officially turning into a heist. Maverick finally took the blue folder and flipped it open. He scanned the pages with a terrifying, mechanical speed. Then he let out a short, dry laugh that chilled me. Reed forgot about the 2018 waiver, Maverick said to the men. He pulled a small ledger from his own pocket. The suits suddenly looked very small against the tall pine trees. He had recorded every cent he ever gave my brother. The evidence was already stacked and ready for the kill. "Tell Helen that her credit cards are now void," Maverick said. He handed the blue folder back to the stunned process server. The two men turned and walked quickly to their car. They drove away, kicking up a cloud of mountain dust. Maverick stayed in the driveway until the sound faded away. I realized he had planned for this specific betrayal years ago. He had given Reed enough rope to hang his own future. I felt a strange pity for my brother. I walked out to the porch and touched Maverick's arm. He was shivering slightly despite the warmth of the day. "Is it over now?" I asked with a trembling voice. He looked at me and the ice in his eyes melted. "No, Elizabeth, this is only the first wave," he said. He looked at the key he gave me earlier. I realized the gold key did not open a bank box. It opened the gates to a house we never knew existed. The gold key sat heavy in my palm as the children laughed. They were chasing a stray dog near the old barn. Maverick led me inside the house to a hidden panel. He pushed a knot in the oak wall behind the stairs. A small door swung open to reveal a narrow staircase. The air smelled of cold stone and ancient, forgotten ink. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. We descended into a basement I never knew existed, a high-tech bunker hidden beneath our humble floors. The secrets were buried deeper than the frost line. The room below was filled with glowing computer monitors and maps. It looked like a command center for a private army. Maverick walked to a central desk and tapped a glass screen. A live feed showed the front gate of the Connecticut mansion. I saw Reed sitting on the marble steps with his head down. Helen was screaming at a man loading furniture into a truck. The eviction was happening in real time before my eyes. Maverick had not just planned a move. He had planned a total collapse. "They think I am a simple writer," Maverick said quietly today. He adjusted the resolution on a grainy camera feed in Riverside. I saw a black van pull up behind the moving truck. Men in tactical gear stepped out with folders in their hands. They were not movers but forensic accountants from a federal office. They began to tag every painting and every piece of jewelry. Helen tried to slap a man, but he blocked her arm. The reality of their situation was finally setting in for them. "What is the gold key for, Maverick?" I asked him then. He pointed to a small safe built into the floor. I knelt down and inserted the key into the lock. It turned with a smooth, mechanical click that felt very final. Inside were 4 passports and a stack of property deeds. None of the deeds were for the Vermont farmhouse or Riverside. They were for a coastal estate in a country far away. Maverick was preparing to leave everything we knew behind us. The war was expanding. A red light began to flash on the main console desk. Someone was trying to hack into the Ironwood Holdings main server. Maverick's fingers flew across the keyboard with a terrifying, rhythmic speed. "Reed is using my old password," he whispered with a smirk. It was a password they had shared as children at camp. My brother was trying to steal back the money he felt owed, but Maverick had set a digital trap months ago for this. The screen turned bright red and then went completely dark. "I just locked him out of every account," Maverick stated. He leaned back in his chair and exhaled a long breath. The cameras showed Reed throwing his phone against the white columns. He looked broken and small in the high-definition light of dawn. I felt a wave of sadness wash over my tired body. My brother was a fool, but he was still my blood. Maverick saw my face and his expression softened for a second. He knew I was mourning the man Reed used to be once. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed from the floorboards above our heads. The children had stopped laughing, and the dog began to bark. I ran up the stairs with Maverick following close behind. We reached the kitchen and saw a window had been smashed. A brick lay on the floor surrounded by jagged glass shards. A note was wrapped around the stone with a thick rubber band. Maverick picked it up and read the messy, angry ink. "We are coming for what is ours," the paper read. I looked at the children and saw they were safe. They were standing by the barn door, looking toward the woods. A dark shape moved between the trees on our property line. It was not a deer or a shadow from the sun. It was a man holding a camera with a long lens. The paparazzi, or the process servers, had found our hidden sanctuary. We were being watched from the darkness of our own forest. The isolation of Vermont was no longer a shield for us. Maverick grabbed his shotgun from the rack by the back door. He did not look like a nature writer or a titan. He looked like a father who had been pushed too far. "Get the children in the car," he said with steel. He walked out onto the porch and fired once into the air. The sound echoed through the valley like a clap of thunder. The shadow in the woods disappeared into the deep brush. I realized we could never stay in this house again. Our life here was dead. The thunder of the gunshot still rang in the valley. I bundled the children into the Volvo's back seat, noticing fresh blood seeping through Maverick's shirt from the glass wound. Their eyes were wide with a terror I could not soothe. Maverick stood on the porch, favoring his left side where the glass from the kitchen window had grazed him, silhouetted against the setting sun. He watched the tree line for any sign of movement. The man with the camera had vanished into the pines. Our peaceful mountain life was now a crime scene of sorts. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. We were leaving the only home they knew. Maverick climbed into the passenger seat and locked the door. He placed the shotgun on the floor at his feet. His face was a mask of cold, calculated determination now. "Drive to the old quarry," he whispered, checking the mirrors. I put the car in gear and sprayed gravel. The tires screamed as we crested the first steep hill. We were not just running from a photographer or Reed. We were running from a past that had finally caught us. The golden key hummed in my pocket. We reached the quarry where the granite walls towered high. A sleek black helicopter sat idling on the flat ground. I had never seen it in our small town. Two pilots in gray uniforms stood waiting by the door. Maverick stepped out of the car and grabbed our bags. "This is the final exit, Elizabeth," he said to me. I looked back at our dusty wagon and felt a loss. The transition from nature writer to titan was finally complete. A storm was rolling in. The children were led toward the spinning rotors by Maverick. He moved with a speed that left me breathless. I watched him hand a folder to the lead pilot. It contained the deeds and the passports from the basement. This was not a sudden escape, it was a plan. Maverick had bought this silence months before the party began. He knew Reed would eventually break the family bond for greed. He had built a bridge to a new world. The wind whipped my hair. Suddenly, a fleet of black SUVs tore into the quarry. They blocked our path back to the main road. I saw Helen step out of the lead vehicle. She was wearing a trench coat and a look of rage. She held a stack of legal papers toward the sky. "You are under a federal freeze, Maverick," she screamed. Her voice was lost in the roar of the engine. She did not know that Maverick owned the law here. The power balance was shifted for good. Maverick did not even look at her as we boarded. He helped me into the plush leather seat inside. The interior smelled of expensive cedar and fresh digital screens. I looked through the window and saw Reed standing back. He looked ashamed to be part of Helen's desperate hunt. He reached out a hand as if to stop us. But the rotors were already lifting us into the air. We left them standing in the dust of the quarry. The mansion was a memory now. As we climbed, Maverick opened a small wooden box. Inside was a secondary phone that began to glow red. A message appeared from an unknown sender in Switzerland now. "The transfer is complete." The text read in bold. Maverick deleted the message and closed the screen forever. He looked at me and his eyes were tired. "We are safe now, Elizabeth," he promised me. I wanted to believe him more than anything else. But the gold key felt heavier than ever. We flew over the green peaks of the Vermont forest. I saw our farmhouse looking small and lonely below us. It was a shell of a life we once loved. Maverick reached over and took my hand in his. His grip was firm and steady like the mountain stone. "We will build something better," he said with a smile. The children were already asleep in the back cabin. They did not see the world they left behind. The sky turned a deep, bruised purple. The pilot turned toward the Atlantic coast and the sea. I realized we were leaving the country for good. Maverick had liquidated every asset to buy our new peace. There would be no more parties or secret holding firms. We were becoming ghosts in a world of loud money. I leaned my head against his shoulder and finally cried. The weight of the secret had nearly broken my spirit. We were free, but we were also completely alone. The ocean appeared. Just as I settled. Maverick's phone buzzed one last time. It was a photo of our farmhouse on fire, sent from a burner phone. Someone had torched our sanctuary as soon as we left. I saw the flames licking the roof of the barn. Helen had sent a message of her own to us. Maverick's jaw tightened, but he did not turn the craft. "They have nothing left to burn," he whispered. I realized the war was over because there was nothing left. We flew into the night. The helicopter leaned into the salt spray of the Atlantic. Maverick stared at the charred image on his screen. Our life in Vermont was ash. But his face remained a mask of stone. I looked at the gold key in my hand and felt its heat. It was the only physical piece of our history left to keep. Below us, the waves were dark and hungry for the shore. The children stirred but did not wake to the chaos. We were ghosts now. We landed on a private dock in the Caribbean dawn. A small white boat waited with its engines humming low. Maverick led us down the ramp as the helicopter ascended again. He handed a final envelope to the pilot and turned away. The humidity hit me like a physical blow to the chest. It was thick with the scent of jasmine and salt. We were thousands of miles from the winter frost. Our new identity was waiting in a leather briefcase. The boat took us to a hidden cove with turquoise water. A small villa sat on the cliffs above the white sand. It looked peaceful, but I saw the cameras in the palms. Maverick opened the briefcase and pulled out 4 new birth certificates. I was no longer Elizabeth Miller from the Green Mountains. I was a woman with a clean slate and no brother. Maverick looked at me and finally dropped his heavy guard. He was tired. "The money is gone, Elizabeth," he whispered near the waves. I looked at him with a sudden, sharp confusion. He had moved the wealth into a permanent trust for others. We had enough to live, but the Titan was dead. He had burned his empire to save our souls from greed. I felt a strange lightness spread through my tired limbs. The burden of the secret had vanished into the blue. We were finally just a family. We walked up the stone path to the villa porch. The children ran ahead to explore the bright, open rooms. I stopped to look back at the wide, endless horizon. There were no mansions or black SUVs in this quiet place. Maverick stood beside me and put his arm around my waist. He looked like the nature writer I loved so long ago. The war was over and the fire had purified us. We had survived the fall. Just as I turned to go inside, my pocket buzzed. I pulled out the secondary phone Maverick had given me, the one I thought was truly dead. A new message appeared from a number I did not know. It was a single photo of our new villa porch. Someone was standing in the trees with a long lens. The hunt was not over, it had simply changed its location. Maverick saw the screen, and his grip on me tightened until it hurt. He looked at the horizon, his jaw setting into that familiar line of war. We were never going to be alone.